So I I I don't really know what to say right now, and I think that's why it's taking me as long as it has to to say something, to say anything, and it's part of me is speechless. Part of me isn't. Part of me is irate. Part of me is extremely angry and pissed off, and just I need to say something, and it doesn't matter who sees it. It doesn't matter what your opinions are of it. I don't care. This is for me. It's been what, like 4 days? 4 days ago, there was a protest. And at that protest, our duly elected single term president, Donald Trump, stood in front of an audience. And after months of spouting just lies, he repeated those lies and encouraged his followers to march to the Capitol. And he utilized language that could have easily been interpreted as asking for them to break through and into the halls of Congress. He made statements talking about not being able to make this country great through weakness. And that's where my first problem is. This is where I've heard so much over the last 4 years of people going, well, that's not what he meant. He didn't say that specific thing. It's not his fault that people took it that way. And I disagree. And I disagree because the reality is that we all live in is that words matter. And the same goes for the people that talked before he got up there. You have his melting vampire of a lawyer, Giuliani, rambling on and then mentioning a trial by combat. And yes, I know he later walked those statements back. He walked those statements back and said, "Well, I meant that the process would battle it out inside the process." But that's not what you said. And for a crowd that is riled up and that you've been lying to for months, saying that the election was stolen, those words stolen, not that you think that there are indiscretions in the voting tallies, or that there needs to be better voting laws, but that it was stolen. To me, that sounds like permission to be violent. And so they did. They walked those hallowed grounds, those grounds I've walked personally that I've been in awe, absolute awe of. That 2 years ago, I walked my son through those very steps. I showed him the wonderfulness that is our nation. I have my favorite photo is of him standing exactly where Martin Luther King stood when he gave the I Have a Dream speech. And it's powerfully powerful and beautiful. Those same steps that have statues of Korean War veterans, that has the wall of the names of those who didn't come back, those same steps where we honor those that laid down their lives during World War II, those same steps, as they walked past the buildings full of history of what we've accomplished in this great nation, the Black History Museum, the Native American Museum, the Aviation and Space Museum, probably my nerdiest favorite of all of them, and marched toward the Capitol building and engaged in violence against the Capitol Police. And I know that there are some people that are going to stay up, and they said it. Not everybody there was bad. You're right. Not everybody was. In fact, the vast majority of those people, they stood by and they didn't engage in violence. They stood by as the violence happened. And you see, that's the thing. That's the thing that we have to remember, that we have to understand, that in this world, the only thing that's necessary for evil to continue is for good men to stand by and do nothing. And so I don't give forgiveness for those people that were there that just stood by. Because where were you when that Capitol Police officer was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher? Where were you when you saw somebody in tactical gear holding zip cuffs? Where were you when they started breaking the windows to the Capitol? When they started chanting to hang the vice president for upholding his constitutional duty? That's the thing that makes my blood boil, is that for years I have heard that this is the party of people who hold true to the Constitution, to what the foundation of this nation was built upon. But yet you were the first ones to hang it out to dry when it didn't suit your means. Because you see, as much as these douchebag politicians who stood up and objected the electoral count, you see, that's not actually what the Constitution says that they're supposed to do. That's not the purpose of the objections. And in fact, there were Republicans that night that said to stop doing this because it ran contrary to that document. The whole purpose of January 6th is simply, just simply, to open up, to verify that there are no other documents stating that these are the electoral voters, and to certify that there are no other versions of this. This is the only one that has been signed by the duly elected individuals and the people that certify it. They're the only ones. That's it. That's all they're saying. That's all they're supposed to say. And the objection is when, and it has happened in the past, that this is why it is part of law. It has happened in the past in which there were two electors. And so Congress had to decide which one was the right one. And so that's what the objection process is for. But that's not what it was used for on the 6th. No, it was used by these individuals who wanted to appeal to the base of an individual who had done nothing but lie to his own people, who had stoked the flames of the worst part of ourselves. It's not a surprise what happened on Wednesday. I don't know that anybody was surprised when they saw it. There was a tweet that my sister sent me, and I think everybody in the world has seen it. Well, that escalated slowly over the course of 4 years. There were people who were calling this behavior out for what it was a long time ago, but yet everybody, but then they were called alarmists and snowflakes, and it's not that bad. That's not what he means. This is somebody that we have on tape in his own words bragging about sexually assaulting women. And then it was excused as locker room talk. As somebody that served in the military for 11 years, I've been in a few locker rooms, and I can tell you that's not our language. That's not okay in any way, shape, or form to brag about sexually assaulting somebody. And the thing is, we have to acknowledge what Wednesday was. We have to acknowledge the reality of what Wednesday was. That it's not a protest, people. I'm sorry. That's not a protest. Were there protesters? Absolutely, they were. They tended to stay in the mall. Um, they tended to look on in horror. And there are a lot of people on record talking about how they did not support what was happening. People who believed that it was going to make them look bad and bring doubt upon their cause. And you know what? It's funny that they say that because there's a reason why they thought that. There's a reason that they thought that because of these few bad actors, their entire movement would be labeled as insurrection or rioters on a day in which someone wants to be more politically correct. But I'll call it for what it was. It was sedition. It was treason. There's a reason why they feel that way because we have to look back to what's been going on in our country for years now. Unfortunately, this has been going on for years, but it really reached a crescendo height this summer after the death of George Floyd. It was at that time that a lot of people, myself included, woke up to a reality that we had convinced ourselves differently of for so many years. I know that for me, I went through most of my life up until this summer thinking that I was on the right side, that I was doing good, that what I was doing was enough because I didn't see, I was colorblind, as I would say, because I didn't judge somebody just because of the melanin in their skin. That was my bar. I thought that was enough, but it wasn't. It wasn't enough. And so there were protests across this nation, and they got labeled as rioters and thugs and looters. But here's the thing, there's this beautiful thing called data. There's people who have actually compiled these protests, all these protests that have happened all over the country, and they've actually looked at it, and they actually were able to come up and determine how many of those protests were violent and how many of them were peaceful. 93% of these protests were peaceful. 7 were what they categorized as violent. But yet they have labeled the entire Black Lives Matter movement as this riotous thug movement. And the racial overtones in just that statement alone are so strong, especially when we compare that to what happened on Wednesday. As Republican lawmakers, I heard them on the Senate floor shudder at calling them what they were, while Democratic lawmakers had no problem calling them what they were: seditionists, looters, thugs. It's hard not to look at the disparity between the Capitol Police's response on Wednesday and their response when those protesters were in DC in the summer. It's hard to look at these images and go, why weren't they better prepared? Why weren't there more holding those lines? Why was why was their response so tepid? When we see that that's not necessarily how they react in other situations, when the individuals in the crowds, well, the only difference I can see is that one, they don't tend to agree so much with the police. In fact, they're openly calling for reforms to happen because of misconduct. and the vast majority of their skin color is brown. And we have a long history in this nation of that. And since this summer, I've spent a lot of time reading and trying to understand more and more because I'm realizing how little I understand of what a Black American goes through on a daily basis. And I'll never forget after George Floyd, we were going to have a conversation with our clients to make sure that they felt like they had a voice, that they could voice their concerns, and that they could voice their grievances. And I remember feeling very uncomfortable. And one of my best friends, her name is Julia, and she is this amazingly strong, badass Black woman and raised in Alabama. And I remember standing in her office before we went in and telling her that I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to broach this topic. And I remember her looking at me and going, Mike, this is what we deal with every day. That was when the veil started lifting from my eyes on that. And I realized it wasn't just good enough not to be a racist. I had to be anti racist. And it took me a long time to even understand what that meant because I was so clueless. And the more I learn, the more my heart breaks. And it kills me that we have this entire part of our country that has been being fed these lies all the way up until even in the eve of this insurrection attempt. We had douchebags in Congress, and you know who I'm talking about. And I would love to meet you. Stand up and try to deflect that really who did this? This was Antifa. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about who is the type of person that tries to demonize just individuals with a shared ideology to be anti fascist. You tell me what type of person, what type of belief system is threatened by individuals who are anti fascist. And for those of y'all that are standing there saying, well, they're violating their freedom of speech. Look, let's be real about this. That freedom of speech is from legal prosecution just for words. And even that, there's limits to. You can't incite violence. That does not mean that me, as an average day, everyday citizen, has to endure this type of speech. And it doesn't mean that you can just say anything without any consequences at all. And I think that this is where we have to understand that just like there is a difference between not being racist and being anti racist, there is a difference between being not a fascist and being anti fascist. You take action when you are anti. It's not okay just to say, well, I don't support white nationalism. We have to take action against it because you see, what happens is they don't play on the same playing field that we do. See, when we have a disagreement, what we want to do is we want to sit down, we want to have a conversation with you. Let's talk about where we're coming from. Let's weigh the different evidence that we have. You see, fascists don't do that. Fascists don't care about what's actually intellectually correct. What they care about is appealing to emotion, not logic. And so they don't come to the podium on the same playing field. They're not seeking new information and compromise. Instead, they want to encourage fear, and they want to prey on that fear. And so we have to be aggressive. We have to not allow that to happen. Otherwise, we see more events like what happened on Wednesday. And the same goes with being anti-racist. It's not just enough to be colorblind to the world. It never was, but it definitely not isn't now because now we have more information. I'm now here have opportunities to listen to people talk that I never would have had the opportunity to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I can pull up a browser, go to YouTube, and I can watch wonderful series like Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which a lot of times are uncomfortable conversations. But I can expose myself to all this new information from perspectives of mine that are so different from mine. And now I see and I realize that it's not just enough. I have to stand up. I have to use my position to help them. Just yesterday, I watched a video of a young man being assaulted after being accused of stealing a cell phone. The young woman in question attempted to tackle him in the lobby, and then she cried foul when that young man's father pulled her off of his son. Girl, you got off lightly. Because I know from my position, I wouldn't have been so kind as to just pull you off of my son. But she did this, and when you watch the video, you see it clear as day. You can listen to her voice and how she tries to spin this situation, which really does make you question the type of society that that type of person grows up in which they feel like they can try that, and then that's okay. But you can watch the video, and you can watch the video of that young man's father because he was smart enough to start recording to make sure that the truth was known because he knows the truth of this nation. He knows that a white woman's voice will always ring louder than a black man's. And if that makes your skin crawl, and if you want to push back, that's fine. Do it. But take a good hard look at American history before you do. Because we have a long, sordid history of that exact situation happening. The first one that always pops into my mind is Emmett Till and the photos of Emmett Till in his cast. Another example is the incident that happened in Central Park in which Donald Trump was at the center of advocating for these young men's lives to be taken when there was not a shred of evidence that the charges were true, and it wound up finding that they were completely falsified. We can go back all the way into what happened in Tulsa, in which a man was accused of something that he did not do for no other reason than because he was black. And when the white mob showed up at the prison to try to take that young man from custody to enact their own type of mob justice, they were met by upstanding patriots who protected that man because he had the right to due process. And what happened after they had the gall to stand up for themselves was that they burned down and bombed, literally bombed American citizens. So before you get upset about that statement, take a good hard look at our history to know where it comes from. It's well founded. We have to stand up and we have to stand against exactly those types of things. I'm reminded of a video of this woman who called the cops because she stated that a 9-year old sexually assaulted her by grabbing her ass. I don't know many people that think that the first thing you should do when you think a 9-year old does something wrong is to get the police involved. In fact, most of the people that I know would immediately talk to the parents and be like, look, this just happened and this needs to be addressed because that's kind of what you do with children. A lot of times they're learning the ways of the world and they're going to do stupid things that are not right. But here's the kicker about this one situation. We live in a world in which there are cameras. And luckily, that woman's voice can't just echo true like it has for so many decades before. Instead, what happened was it was revealed through the camera that as she was at the counter paying for her stuff, and that young child and her parent walked by, that his book bag brushed up against her. And there were people in that situation who chose to be anti-racist at that point and call her out, videotape her at that moment, and to bring shame to that entire process. And that's what we have to do. We cannot allow any more quarter for these types of behaviors. Otherwise, we will see Wednesday happen more and more. We have to call these people what they were. They are insurrectionists. They are not Americans. We have to stop allowing them this thing where they can fly the Confederate flag and call themselves an American. No, I'm sorry. That is the flag of traitors to this country. And in your own words, if you don't like it, then get out. Those statues that you think should be protected because of history, no, let's be honest. There's a place where history is able to exist properly, and that's in a museum, not in front of a courtroom, not when the history of when that statue was erected is that it was erected during the civil rights movement. That is a clear message on the purpose of that statue. It still boggles my mind that we have American military bases that are named after Confederate officers. What? Does Germany name their military bases off of Nazi generals? And those weren't even generals that tried to break apart Germany. Those were just horrible people, and they still don't do that. But yet, we, for some reason, still want to view them as American when they were literally trying to break America apart. And don't even get me started on the reason why, because if I freaking hear one more damn time that it had nothing to do with slavery, I'm liable to get arrested for assault. Because it's clear as day, people, we have access to documents. We can actually see the Confederate Declaration of Independence where it's clearly stated the reason why slavery. But see, we want to try to forget that this is a nation that was built on the backs, the broken backs of black people. That's what we're built on. We're built on oppression. We're built on the fact that our economy grew because we didn't pay the laborers. And then we get upset when they start to get rights. And I hear all these people that pull yourself by your up by your bootstraps. No, that you can't even understand the irony of that statement. Do me a favor, sit down and then try to just lift yourself up by pulling on your shoes. Tell me how that goes. That statement is meant to talk about the impossibility of it. And you tout it as though that's the cure for it. And that's the effect because we had a party that has demonized being intellectual because they understand that if they were to encourage critical thought, they wouldn't be elected. And this is the same party that made excuses for Donald Trump's actions for 4 years and then act surprised when Wednesday happened. Unprecedented times. We have a president who did nothing and actively discouraged these simple behaviors that would have saved countless American lives. And his inaction cost who knows how many hundreds of thousands of lives, because yes, some would have still died from the virus, but it didn't have to be the number that it is now. And yet people still excused him. And they did, even after the riot, the insurrection, they still continued to excuse him. Despite his own exact words, even in his video, which took an astronomical amount of time to come out, President-elect Biden waited and waited and waited because he had, I guarantee you, no intent to overshadow the president. He gave him every opportunity to say the first words to denounce, but he didn't. In the video that he released while people were still standing inside the Capitol, he reinforced the baseless election fraud claims that even his lawyers in court admitted weren't true, and then told them to go home. We love you. You're special. You're right. You are special. You are special because you are insurrectionists. You are special because you tried to overthrow the government. You are indeed special. And let's not lose sight of the fact that this was not a harmless protest. As of right now, 5 people have lost their lives. One of them, a fellow veteran that believed that her president would not lie to her. Today I saw the video of that and it broke my heart. As they continued to try to bash down that doorway, they called out that there was a gun because one of the Capitol police officers understood that he had to control that choke point. And then the shot rang out. One of my sisters died because she thought that her president wouldn't have lied to her. So don't tell me his words have no meaning, that it's not what he meant. And I caution those who are looking at the Capitol Police and they want to demonize everything that they saw. I caution you against that. By all means, focus that hate towards those people that we saw taking selfies with these insurrectionists. The ones moving barricades or moving up the stairs and giving inch by inch in this mayhem, don't be very cautious about focusing your anger towards them. The thing is, anybody with any tactical knowledge understands that there's such thing called a tactical retreat. And in fact, in the Army, we call it breaking contact. And you do that when you're outnumbered, when you know that you're not, by taking a stand, you're not going to win this. And so you break contact. And while I will definitely join in any chorus that in asking why there weren't more officers there at the first place, I don't criticize them for their tactical retreat. They understood that if one, their charge was the people inside that building, and thank goodness for their actions. Not one of those people that they were charged to protect wound up in harm's way. The building, while symbolic, is just a building. Those windows can be replaced. Those doors can be replaced. Those people cannot. And so they had to make tactical decisions. And they controlled choke points. They limited their use of force, I believe partly because they were afraid of it escalating even more. because they were so outnumbered. If even 10% of those individuals had defied DC law and brought guns into this, it would have gotten worse. We're partly lucky that it's only five, because let's not dance around this. There were chants to hang Mike Pence. There was a gallows built. There was a man walking around with zip cuffs. Another man with a vehicle with incendiary devices. Don't talk to me about it being peaceful. So it's time, America. It's time for you to put aside party politics. It's time for you to do what everyone that I served with in the military did, which was have our own opinions, but when it came down to it, when it came down to brass tacks, when the rubber met the road, we defended our country, even if we disagreed with those in power. I served under Bush and I served over under Obama. It didn't matter. I carried out the lawful orders to protect the Constitution. When I raised my right hand, that is what I swore to do, to protect the Constitution. And I said that oath multiple times in my 11-year career. And even though I don't wear that uniform anymore, even though it hangs in my closet gathering dust, I still hold true to that oath. And I believe every American can. You're so focused on the Pledge of Allegiance, but yet not the actions associated with it. You're perfectly fine with somebody putting their face on our flag, but you call yourself a patriot. You want to decry the action of burning a flag, but you have no problem when you deface it. You talk about the Constitution and the First Amendment right, and God, you love your Second Amendment right, even though you don't understand what well armed militia meant in that document. Because, by the way, guys, as with all legal documents, it's clearly defined. But when it comes down to it, you have no problem with people trampsing all over it. And I say that because you did not stand against them when they did it. That's the point of being anti fascist. That's the point of being anti racist. And it's time that we do that. It's time that we, as an entire populace, put aside red and blue and stand together as Americans again. We can disagree on where our country should focus its efforts and how to care for the people in this country. We can disagree on that. But one thing we cannot allow is to disagree on the fact of how this country works, our democratic process. Protest all you want, but do it peacefully. And when you see someone start spouting racist nonsense or fascist nonsense, you take a stand against them and you ensure that they know that while you may stand with them in protest, you do not stand with those types of actions. Because remember, the only thing that evil needs to grow and exist and become stronger is for good people to stand by and do nothing. And that's what I saw on Wednesday. So it's time we understand to move forward in this country, we must understand where we're coming from. We must know and acknowledge the darkness, and we must pull it into the light. And for every politician that continued to spout those lies, you have blood on your hands. If others don't say it, I will. You're a traitor to this nation by supporting the language needed to inspire an insurrection. I will remember you, and I hope every voter in this country does too. I've already seen one arrest of a legislator that took part in it, and I hope more come to heal. Because the only way that we're going to move forward is if we allow no quarter for fascism and authoritarianism. Didn't really have a message that I was trying to get across when I sat down, but though I started not knowing what I wanted to say or needed to say, I apparently definitely knew that there was something that needed to be heard. And that's all this is. You don't know me and I don't know you. And I'm not more special than anybody else. But I need you to know, no, really, I just needed to be heard. My heart breaks for my country. On Wednesday, my son consoled me as I cried to the images of people. So you don't get to call yourself a patriot anymore. No, you're a traitor, an insurrectionist. And history will remember you as such. And for everybody that stood by, understand you were just as capable, or just as culpable, because you took no action to stop it. I guess that's all